table.
Let the world understand.
Let the world understand.
Israel will defend
Israel
itself.
will defend
And
itself.
will do so
with justice and strength.
with justice and strength. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam
Je
President.
remercie le
I thank
Je
the
remercie le-
representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
God the compassionate, the merciful. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam President, for assuming the presidency of the Security Council this month, for the convening for this emergency meeting to address ongoing Israeli aggression against Lebanon and critical situation in the region. We acknowledge Slovenia for its successful conclusion of the presidency in September. Madam President, distinguished delegates, for a year now, the apartheid and occupying regime of Israel has continued its brutality in occupied Palestine with full impunity. And now this regime is extending its brutal aggressive war to Lebanon and targeting innocent people day and night across the border and deep inside the territory. The regime is pushing the region to the edge of an all-out unprecedented catastrophe. Israel has no intention to pursue peace or a ceasefire. Regrettably, the UN Security Council has remained paralyzed due to the United States' obstruction of any effective decision by this body. Unwavering support provided by the United States, United Kingdom, and certain Western states to Israel has given a carte blanche to this aggressive terrorist regime for all sorts of sinister behavior. No more than ever, this regime has become a serious threat to international peace and security. The only way to prevent further escalation is clear. Israel must immediately cease its war on Gaza, and its attacks on Lebanon must stop. Madam President, distinguished delegates, as we informed the members of the Council in our letter yesterday, the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran launched a series of missile strikes targeting the military and security positions of the Israeli regime. Iran's action was in full accordance with the inherent right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, and a direct response to the regime's repeated acts of aggression against Iran, including the violation of Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity during the past months. Our invocation of the right of self-defense, followed by an extended period of restraint, reflects Iran's responsible approach to regional and international peace and security at a time when the illegal action and genocide carried out by this occupying apartheid regime against the Palestinian people, as well as its repeated military aggression against Lebanon and Syria, continue. Iran's missile strikes were a necessary and proportionate response to Israeli continued terrorist aggressive acts over the past 2 months. This includes the violation of Iran's sovereignty, the assassination of political leader of Hamas in Tehran and Iranian citizens, the targeting and wandering Iran's ambassador to Lebanon, and to recent assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the resistance and Secretary General of Hezbollah, and General Abbas Nilfroushan, an Iranian military advisor in Beirut. I wish to mention the key facts that clearly demonstrate Iran's action under self-defense is fully justified, lawful, and firmly grounded in international legal principles. On 1st April 2024, Israel presently attacked Iran's diplomatic mission in Damascus, Syria, in a blatant violation of international law, specifically the principle of inviolability of diplomatic and consular premises. Iran immediately sought the Council's condemnation. What was this body's response? Nothing. Rather than condemning Israel's act of aggression, the Council merely called for Iran's restraint and even refrained from issuing a press statement proposed by Russia. After 10 days of silence from the Security Council, Iran has no choice but to use its inherent right under international law to respond to this severe violation. On 31st July 2024, Israel committed yet another act of aggression by assassination Mr. Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas political leader and the former Prime Minister of Palestine, while he was an official guest of the Iranian government in Tehran. This was a flagrant breach of Iran's national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Despite Iran's call for action, the Council again failed to act. Meanwhile, several states, including the United States, urged Iran to maintain restraint, citing ongoing ceasefire negotiations. We respected these calls for diplomacy, yet no ceasefire materialized and Israel only grew bolder. Again, we witnessed another heinous crime by Israel, this time through the detonation of communication devices targeting the innocent people of Lebanon. A larger number of innocent civilians were killed and injured, including Iran's ambassador to Lebanon. This was yet another manifestation of state terrorism. Following, Israel carried out a blatant act of terrorist aggression using US-supplied thousands-pound bunker busters to assassinate Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, and a symbol of resistance against Israeli occupation and aggression in Lebanon. This brutal attack resulted in the martyrdom of numerous innocent people, including Hezbollah leader and Iranian General Abbas Nilfurushan, while also leaving many civilians wounded. This egregious act underscores once more the regime's continued reliance on violence and terror. Madam President, the Islamic Republic of Iran has consistently pursued peace and stability for the region and called for an immediate ceasefire and the cessation of civilians' casualties, a position we have maintained for over a year. Yet, experience has proven that Israel only understands the language of force. Diplomacy has repeatedly failed, as Israel views restraint not as a gesture of goodwill, but as a weakness to exploit. Each act of restraint taken by Iran has only emboldened Israel to commit even greater crimes and more acts of aggression. Consequently, Iran's response was necessary to restore balance and deterrence. Israel must understand that each act of aggression it makes is not unpunished and will be met with consequences. This is the cost this regime must bear. Contrary to the regime which consistently considers innocent civilians and civilian infrastructure as legitimate target for aggression and massacre, Iran's response has only targeted the regime's military and security installation with its defensive missile strike, because the Islamic Republic of Iran is grounded in ethical principles and noble teaching of Islam and full compliance with the principles of distinction under international humanitarian law. Madam President, distinguished delegates, the international community cannot afford to remain silent. We reiterate our call on this Council to respond with urgency and determination. The Security Council must intervene to stop Israeli continued aggression and war crimes against Lebanon, Gaza, and Syria, and to prevent the situation from escalating into a full-scale regional war. Furthermore, the Security Council must force Israel to comply with its obligation on the resolution this body adopted. Israel must fully implement Resolution 1701. Finally, Madam President, we strongly warn against any further act of aggression by Israeli terrorist regime against our national security and vital interests. Iran is fully prepared to take further defensive measures if necessary to protect its legitimate interests and defends its territorial integrity and sovereignty against any act of military aggressions and the illegal use of force. In this regard, Iran will have no hesitation. In conclusion, the regime of the United States and the United Kingdom regime, notorious enablers of the Israeli regime, along with France, have once again cynically attempted to justify Israeli heinous crimes under the guise of self-defense, shifting the blame onto Iran. While the Israeli regime must be held accountable for the atrocity crimes and cannot disregard the U.S. complicity in Israel's crimes. Israel's warmongering relies on U.S. regime, military support and political backing. American weapons constitute the major part of Israeli weaponry and ammunition used in Gaza, and therefore the United States is implicated in every aspect of Israel's atrocity. The vast majority of bombs Israeli drops on Gaza and Lebanon are US-made. The US regime even provides Israel with jet fuel. The US has sent so many arms to Israel since October 7 that the Pentagon has struggled to find sufficient cargo aircraft to deliver the materials. If there were even a shred of honesty in their concerns for the loss of innocent people lives in Gaza or Lebanon, or for the spread of war across the region, they could easily strip Israel of the tools it used to commit those atrocities, yet their actions reveal their true intent to embolden Israel's criminal actions. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I now give the floor to the representative of Iraq to take the floor.
شكرا جزيلا السيدة.
Thank you, Madam President. Allow me to congratulate Switzerland on assuming the presidency of the Council this month. I wish you all success. I also thank Slovenia for its efforts as president of the Council in September. I thank France for calling for this meeting. I would also like to express my deepest gratitude to Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, for his briefing. We highly value his position and his calls for a ceasefire. Madam President, holding meeting after meeting at the Security Council over the past year without achieving any tangible results to stop continued Israeli attacks against the Palestinian people reflects a painful reality. The reality that the Security Council is not making any effective or resolute decisions to stop these violations that allow the occupation to perpetuate its practices and escalate violence in the region. It is time for the Security Council to play an effective role to maintain international peace and security, especially as Israel against Palestinian and Lebanese territories persist. The Security Council must bear its primary responsibility of maintaining international peace and security according to the Charter of the United Nations. The Security Council must adopt binding resolutions to ensure an immediate ceasefire, as it did in other conflicts around the world. Failure by Security Council to play its role and to fulfill its responsibility to maintain international peace and security opens the door to Israel to persist in its violations without any real deterrent. This leads to more instability and jeopardizes regional and international peace. The international community and the Security Council in particular needs to re-evaluate its policies towards this conflict. It must take tangible steps to end the occupation and ensure the protection of civilians. Continued violations, the aggression, military expansions, all these actions by Israeli occupation forces without any deterrent pushes the region towards a wide regional confrontation, which jeopardizes regional security, causes significant human suffering, spreads extremism and terrorism, and further complicates the situation. Failure to put an end to these crimes emboldens Israel to go even further with its violations. It emboldens it to launch military attacks. This situation not only aggravates the suffering of the Palestinian and Lebanese people, it also jeopardizes stability and security in the region as a whole. In the absence of any deterrent, the conflict gets worse, and the risk of the region being dragged into a dangerous and widespread conflict increases. Due to the absence of decisive international intervention, the conflict has expanded to include Lebanon, which might lead to an all-out war in the region. Madam President, the accumulation of practices by the occupation forces over the past 75 years, the flagrant violations against the Palestinian people, the occupation of Arab territories in Syria and Lebanon, the repeated attacks, they all constitute a blatant violation of international law and international humanitarian law. These crimes, the massacres, the violence, including the recent unjust attacks on the city of Beirut that claim the lives of thousands of Lebanese, deepen the wounds and aggravate the conflict in the region. The war has entered a very dangerous phase that portends more destruction and killing. It would exceed what we've seen in the past days as occupation forces continue with their genocidal act, with their killings that amount to war crimes and genocide. Occupation forces are disregarding international humanitarian law and human norms, acting impetuously without any deterrent. Occupation forces are trying to find false pretexts to defend the commission of those crimes. Occupation forces are committing crimes of deliberate mass killings of civilians in Gaza and Lebanon and other occupied Arab territories. These crimes are despicable. They reflect the brutality and hostile behavior of occupation forces. The international community is now before a legal, humanitarian, and moral responsibility that tests our common humanity. The international community must state that the war launched on Gaza is not an act of self-defense, as Israel claims. This claim is legally invalid. Israel took the path of vengeance and genocide. This is confirmed by the horrifying numbers of casualties, Palestinian civilians, women, children, the elderly, even UN staff, and their families. This is a dangerous precedent that we've never seen before. The war on Gaza has expanded to include Lebanon. Most recently, we've witnessed an unjust attack that led to the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and other resistance figures. The war can further expand to include other countries in the region. This is a threat to the stability of the Middle East as a whole. This scenario can have grave repercussions that go beyond the borders of local conflicts. We might be seeing a wider escalation that include mutual attacks, which would be a serious threat to international and regional stability, especially if other regional powers joined this equation, which would invite interventions, international interventions that would further complicate the situation, that would jeopardize political and social stability, that would aggravate humanitarian crisis, that would lead to mass displacement, that would lead to an increase in the number of refugees and IDPs, that would increase the pressure on neighboring countries, even European countries. Such developments would also have negative economic consequences, as economic activities would be disrupted, poverty and unemployment rates would surge. Such tensions would lead to an increase in oil prices if maritime navigation routes and energy sources were affected. Madam President, Iraq condemned statements and threats by the Prime Minister of the Israeli Occupation Authority against countries of the region. Such escalatory statements fuel conflicts and push the region towards more tension and war. Such public threats are not only provocative, they also constitute a clear violation to the principles of international law and the United Nations Charter, which proscribe the threat of use of force against sovereign states. In conclusion, Madam President, Iraq expresses its full solidarity with the just cause of the Palestinian people. We strongly support its aspirations to be granted its rights to establish an independent state, its independent states with Al-Quds Sharif as its capital. Iraq expresses its support and solidarity with the government and people of Lebanon against the barbaric attacks that violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Iraq for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, allow me at the outset to congratulate you on your assumption of the presidency of the Security Council this month. I thank your predecessor for conducting the work of the Security Council last month. I would also like to thank the Secretary General of the United Nations for participating and being with us today in this session. We stand in solidarity with him in the face of the Israeli campaigns against him. Madam President, for the past months, the Security Council held successive sessions to discuss the continued Israeli aggression on the Palestinian people and on the countries of our region. We would not have gotten here. We would not be holding this emergency session and maybe other sessions in the next days had your council shouldered its main responsibility in the maintenance of international peace and security since the beginning of the barbaric Israeli aggression on Gaza. The majority of leaders and representatives of member states who spoke at the General Assembly in the past high-level general debate, they called upon the Security Council to take immediate action to stop the barbaric Israeli aggression on the Palestinian people and to stop the repeated Israeli attacks on the states of the region, to implement its resolutions to end the Israeli occupation of Arab occupied territories, to stop its continued crimes which started decades ago. Their statements reflected a genuine international will to put an end to the impunity of the Israeli occupation entity and its obsession with war and bloodshed. All these calls were met by Israeli war criminals continuing their criminal aggression in Palestine and Lebanon, showing off their violations of international law and the UN Charter. They have been leveling accusations against our organization and trying to terrorize its representatives and agencies, including UNRWA. We meet today as our region is on the brink of an all-out destructive war that can spare. It is no longer acceptable for the Security Council response to be limited to holding session after session without adopting any product that could lead to a serious and tangible action. To be more specific, the reluctance of the United States to stop this Israeli madness, but rather supporting and encouraging it, while preventing the Security Council to shoulder its responsibility, namely to maintain international peace and security, is what got us to this dangerous situation. The US administration cannot deny its responsibility by making statements to express concern, or warning against dangerous escalation, or calling for restraint, at a time when it continues to provide unlimited, multifaceted support to the Israeli occupation entity, vowing to protect it from accountability and ensuring its impunity. Madam President, It was not enough for the Israeli occupation authorities to see the tens of thousands of lives they have killed, to see the bloodshed, to see the infrastructure they destroyed in occupied Palestine. They continued the escalation in the region, pushing it towards a full-on war by continuing their attacks on the states of the region, including my country, Syria. The Israeli occupation forces launched repeated attacks targeting civilians in safe areas, targeting civilian infrastructure and residential buildings, even targeting diplomatic premises. The latest attack on Monday targeted a number of safe residential neighborhoods and regions in Damascus with drones and airstrikes.
3 مدنيين
3 civilians, including 1 journalist, and injuring 7 others, while also causing tremendous property damage. A few minutes ago, another Israeli aggression targeted a residential building in Damascus, leading to the killing of 3 people and injuring others. Those are the preliminary numbers. In brotherly Lebanon, the criminal occupation authorities used civilian communication equipment to conduct mass killing. And then they mobilized their forces in preparation of an incursion. They targeted a number of residential buildings in the southern suburb of Beirut in order to assassinate the Secretary General of Hezbollah, who led an honorable Lebanese national resistance against the Israeli occupation. All these different forms of the barbaric Israeli occupation on our region were also perpetrated during the General Assembly, during the high-level week of the General Assembly, which reflects Israel's contempt for our organization and the calls of its member states. The so-called Israeli Prime Minister boasted about taking the decision of attacking the southern Beirut suburb from here in New York, following a propaganda campaign full of misleading lies that he launched during his statement, while the majority of delegations refused to listen to him. The Syrian Arab Republic condemns all the continued Israeli aggression on the states of the region. We call upon the Security Council to take immediate action to put an end to the Israeli impunity, which is setting the region on fire, which is threatening international and regional peace and security. We reaffirm our legitimate right to defend our people and land to fight these crimes with all the means guaranteed by the international law. We also reaffirm that we stand with the Palestinian and Lebanese people. We fully support them despite the grave challenges facing Syria caused by the aggressive policies adopted by Western states in service of Israel, and despite the illegitimate coercive measures and inhumane blockade imposed on Syria, Syria will spare no effort to provide humanitarian assistance to our brothers and sisters in Lebanon. We have mobilized as a government and civil society all our energy and resources to help all those coming from Lebanon, be they Syrian, Lebanese, or from other nationalities. Madam President, Article 51 of the Charter stipulated the legitimate right of states to self-defense. This is an inherent right for people and states, and the Israeli occupation entity does not have it. This was stressed by the ICJ. Because occupation and the aggression it represents is the basic crime which deprives its perpetrators from any rights. The inaction of the Security Council allowed the Israeli occupation entity to cross all red lines, pushing the Islamic Republic of Iran to practice its legitimate right to self-defense based on Article 51 of the Charter in response to the aggression of the Israeli occupation entity. The Iranian response came after a long period of self-restraint and attempts to prevent further escalation. The Iranian response was limited to military and security facilities. This stresses Iran's responsible approach to international and regional peace and security. We were not surprised to hear the representative of the US administration and a number of her alliances criticize the Iranian response. These states look at the Charter as a tool that they use at their own whims to target their foes and protect their partners. We have listened time and again to the representatives of successive US administrations presenting false and distorted interpretations of Article 51 of the Charter to justify aggression on states that are thousands and thousands of miles away, to occupy their land, to loot their resources under the pretext of quote-unquote protecting or maintaining national US security or fighting terrorism, while prohibiting other states from practicing their legitimate right to self-defense at their immediate borders in the face of a genuine aggression against them. In conclusion, Madam President, the representatives of member states who took the floor and spoke at the General Assembly in the last few days have spoken. It is now high time for the Security Council to listen, to take urgent and serious steps to stop the continuing suffering in Gaza, to stop the bloodshed in the region, to put an immediate and unconditional end to the Israeli aggression on Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, to stop and end the Israeli occupation of Arab territories by implementing Council resolutions. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic, and I give the floor to the representative of Italy.
Madam President, let me first congratulate you for assuming the presidency in this month of October, and also to thank the Secretary General for his briefing and his work. Italy firmly condemns yesterday's Iranian missile attack on Israel. We express deep concern for the ongoing developments and call for restraint and responsibility on all regional actors. Avoiding any further spiral of escalations has to be our common priority, our top priority, as well as preventing another dramatic humanitarian outburst. Italy will continue to work for a diplomatic solution, also in its capacity as the G7 rotating president, for the stabilization of the Israeli-Lebanese border, and in this regard strongly recalls the leaders' declaration of September 25 for a 21-day ceasefire in Lebanon. And while we are gathering now, our Prime Minister is about to host a call of the leaders of the G7 to discuss the situation in the region. Italy calls on all parties involved for the full implementation of Resolution 1701 and invites the Security Council to consider to make the implementation of UNIFIL's mandate more effective, with a view to ensure the security along the Blue Line and to grant the displaced population of northern Israel and Lebanon to safely return home. The security of all UNIFIL personnel has to be respected and fully guaranteed. Sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon needs also to be respected. Madam President, Italy calls for an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon. We will continue to work for a diplomatic solution, and we are ready to assist the Lebanese armed forces in assuming their responsibilities along the border with Israel. To such extent, Italy also deems of utmost importance to fully support and revamp the Lebanon-Israel negotiations to peacefully establish their borders. We will continue to engage with our partners and allies and to keep open channels of dialogue with all the actors in the region. At the same time, it is equally urgent to reach an agreement for a ceasefire in Gaza and to release the hostages in line. At this specific time, it is our collective responsibility to call for calm and restraint, aware of the fact that every minute that goes by, the lives of innocent men, women, and children of the entire region hang in the balance. Italy is a firm supporter of the principle two people, two states, and shares the goal of a comprehensive, lasting regional peace that can ultimately be achieved on the basis of a two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security within agreed, recognized borders, and full recognition of Israel's existence and respect of its security by all regional actors. I thank you.
Merci le représentant.
I thank the There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I would like to warmly thank the Secretary General, and I now invite members of the Council to informal consultations on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.